State police got your license and registration. I realized, Dr. Van, when you're driving by me there, you're a little too close to the back of that semi. I got one car between you and the back of this trailer.
And welcome to Law and Crime, coming to you live from Moscow, Idaho. I'm Anjanette Levy, and we are here at the airport. It's a regional airport for the Moscow, Idaho, Pullman, Washington area, and we are awaiting the arrival of Bryan Kohberger. He was released from the Monroe County Jail in Pennsylvania earlier this morning into the custody of Pennsylvania State Police. So the process to extradite him, to bring him back to Idaho to answer to the murder charges for the murders of Kaylee Gonsalves, Maddie Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin is underway. We don't know exactly where he is in this process, but we believe he will be flown into this airport via private plane. Again, officials are being mum on that. They are not giving us any information because of security concerns. But we've talked to people in this business, in this line of work, who transport prisoners, who believe this will be done via private plane. So we are expecting him back in Idaho sometime today. When he is brought back here, he will be booked into the Latah County Jail just like any other inmate would be. And on this show, as always, we take your questions, so please submit them to us via Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, or even on our YouTube chat, and we will do our best to answer them. And we want to get right to your questions right now. Joining me today to do that is Joe Giacalone. He is a retired New York Police Department sergeant and retired FBI agent and attorney Bobby Chacon. Thanks to both of you guys for being here today. Just a really quick process in this extradition process. Bobby, are you surprised? Because Pennsylvania officials said they had about 10 days to figure this out, but now they are basically bringing him back here today. Are you surprised at how quickly this is moving?
No, not at all, Anjanette. I think that, everybody wants this to happen as quick as possible. There's so much publicity around this case. I'm sure they had days and days to think about this. Since he was arrested, I'm sure the people responsible for doing the transportation were already planning it and how they were going to do it. And I think you always want to do something like this as quickly as possible to avoid any kind of delays that might pop up, weather or anything else, especially this time of year. Flying across the northern part of the United States, weather impacts you a lot. So I'm sure they wanted to do this as quickly as possible, just so that they didn't run into any logistical issues getting him back to Idaho.
And Joe, I'm wondering, this is a small sheriff's office here, a small police department. I don't think they want everybody to know their plans for security. Obviously, I know they don't, because nobody will comment on whether he is actually going to be flown into this airport. It would only make sense that he would be, because it's about a 7 or 8, 10-minute drive from the Latah County Jail. So this is a small police department being assisted by larger agencies. Talk to me about the security concerns of transporting somebody such as Bryan Kohberger from an airport like this to the Latah County Jail.
Well, we have to be concerned about somebody who's been following this case, who is very angry at this. We want to make sure that nothing happens to him, right? We want to make sure that he faces justice. We want to make sure that nobody takes the law into their own hands. And, I don't know if I would be flying into that airport, right? I might fly in somewhere else and just take the trip if I was worried about large crowds and everything else that goes on. So just be mindful of that, too, while you're out there.
Exactly. And there is another smaller regional airport in this area just down the road. But we are at this airport because we were believing, and we're not the only ones here, I should say, a lot of media are here camped out thinking this will be the spot. But he could be flown into any number of airports. And I talked to a U.S. Marshal yesterday, a retired U.S. Marshal, who said they use decoys, they use all types of things to transport prisoners, to keep people from knowing where the prisoners are at each time. And when Bryan Kohberger does arrive here, he will be booked into the Latah County Jail. I spoke with the sheriff yesterday, Richard Skiles, and he told me that Bryan Kohberger will not be kept with the inmates. He'll be in his own kind of segregated area, and they will be able to accommodate. They're going to figure out how to accommodate his strict vegan diet. So that is something they will have to do because he becomes the sheriff's responsibility as soon as he lands here in Idaho. So let's get to your questions. Our first question comes to us from Lorelei69. And I forgot to mention this. There's a gag order in this case now. So Bobby Chacon, I'm going to ask you, with the new gag order in place, does that mean that the probable cause document will not be released once Bryan comes here to Idaho? That's from Lorelei69 on Twitter.
That's a great question, and I'd have to do a review of the Idaho state law. This is all covered by the criminal procedure laws in each state. Each state handles them differently. You'd also have to read the judge's gag order on how it covers and what it covers. I don't anticipate it would remain under seal. The gag orders normally prevent either party from addressing the media and doing interviews and things like that. In the normal course of the court proceedings, things are filed in the court, and this is a matter of public record. So these documents, might be unsealed, but you just might not have either party allowed to comment on them. So it all depends. If the judge issues a sealing order, that's different if it remains under seal. But it could, if it's just a gag order, these things could be lodged in the court, unsealed as public records, and then each party, you couldn't now then go to the sheriff or the defense counsel and ask them to comment on them. They would be prohibited under the gag order from doing that. So it all depends on if the judge ordered a sealing order along with the gag order, or if these will become part of the public record.
And there has been no order to seal documents as of yet. I think it would be unlikely that they would keep that probable cause affidavit sealed. The district attorney, the prosecutor here, Bill Thompson in Latah County, said that would be made public after Bryan Kohberger is formally served with it, which cannot happen until he is back here in Idaho. That's the reason we haven't seen that document yet. In that gag order, we should note, too, this was entered into around 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon is when the magistrate judge signed it, and it was a stipulation between the defense and the prosecution. So they both agreed to enter into this gag order, meaning they can't say things out of court about Bryan Kohberger, about their belief about his guilt or innocence. They really can't make any comments like that. Our next question comes from Rob RC. It's actually at Rob 482-4914 on Twitter. And he asks, do you think a high-profile pro bono attorney will ride into town? Joe, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, Rob, I think that we might definitely see somebody swoop in here. Right here is actually now international case. They're following it everywhere. It is a great opportunity for somebody who wants to make their bones in the law profession. So if you take the case on for free, right, pro bono, it might provide that opportunity if just in case they do win the case. And I always point to cases like Casey Anthony, where the lawyer steps in who is relatively unknown and all of a sudden becomes famous when he won. So, yes, I definitely think that we might see somebody swoop in here at the last second.
And right now, there's a woman named Ann Taylor. She is a chief public defender in the Coeur d'Alene area for the county in that area. She is the person who's representing him at this point in time. And Fox News was reporting yesterday they were at the house, the crime scene, when defense investigators actually visited that house. So the defense team seems to be taking shape. I would assume that there would be another attorney, maybe two more added to that team. Our next question comes from Jennifer Norrie on Facebook. And I will take this question, is because we just addressed it, is Kathy Mabbitt, she said Christine Mabbitt, but she's asking, is Kathy Mabbitt defending him in Idaho? No, it's Ann Taylor, chief public defender in the Coeur d'Alene, Idaho area. She is the person representing him at this point in time. Kathy Mabbitt is the county coroner here in Latah County, and she has a conflict of interest. She would not be able to represent him, and she's also not qualified to handle death penalty cases. And a lot of people believe this will be a death penalty case since Ann Taylor is death qualified. The next question is from Christy Lines from YouTube. So the gag order is just for lawyers or police as well. Yes, it is for everybody. Police, agents of law enforcement, agents of the prosecution and the defense. And then let's now go to Kaylee from YouTube. Bobby, I'll ask you this one. Is it possible the police have found the knife already, the murder weapon, and are hiding it from the public? Bobby, your thoughts on that?
Well, it's certainly possible. I don't think that they have, though. I think that there's no reason with what they've made public already. I don't think there's a reason. I can't think of a reason it would benefit them to keep it quiet. If they do, in fact, have it, they're going to have to let the defense know fairly quickly. The defense has a right then to have that knife tested and to see all the, reports related to the knife and whether the police ran any tests on it. And so part of the discovery, the pretrial discovery. So I think that I don't personally think they have it. They could, it's possible, but I'm trying to think of a possible benefit they would gain by not publicizing it. And I can't really think of one. So I don't think they have it.
And they said as late as last Friday they didn't have the murder weapon. So we know they executed search warrants at the apartment of Bryan Kohberger near the Washington State University campus and also at his parents' home. So we know that those search warrants were executed, and we don't know what they found. All of those documents remain sealed at this point in time. Jennifer Rose asks, Joe, and I'll throw this one to you. Jennifer Rose from YouTube asks, what happens now when Bryan Kohberger goes back to Idaho?
Well, hi, Jennifer. Like I said, he's going to get booked into the process over there. Remember that an arrest warrant was issued. They have to close out the arrest warrant as soon as he arrives in Idaho. They'll file their appropriate papers with the court saying that he is in custody. And then he will be put into, a segregated section, right? He's not going to be put with the general population for fear of his safety. And then they already made a statement about how he's going to be fed, right? They're going to follow the rules on that. And then I think the investigators will be given an opportunity to sit down with his attorney or attorneys and to see if he is willing to talk. And if he's willing to talk, then they can go about and Mirandize him and go through the process that way to see if they can find out more. I'm not hopeful for that part, right? I don't think the lawyers are going to let him talk, but I think that's the next step that we will see today as soon as he lands and gets in the courthouse.
And our next question comes from Fernanda Volcanis from YouTube. And Fernanda is asking, Bobby, I'll ask you this. After Bryan Kohberger arrives in Idaho, what will be the police's job on the case? I think she's talking about the Moscow police. So what is their role now that we're in the prosecution stage of this case?
Well, they will remain partners in this case. I mean, the very famous Law and Order series, where you always see the detectives work the first half of the case and then the prosecutors take over. But it really is a partnership. So there'll be several teams of police. Some will be working directly with the prosecutors. Literally every day, those detectives will go over to the prosecutor's office or where they have what we call a war room, where all of the evidence is being compiled and compared and put up on walls and looked at. And then you still have other teams of police executing search warrants or doing a lot of interviews or re-interviewing people. So there's a lot still going on. There'll be a whole dedicated team of police working still with the prosecutors at the courthouse or at the prosecutor's office, going through that evidence. Because remember, the evidence still remains in the police evidence room. It gets checked out for prosecutors to look at it, to go to a laboratory to be examined. But it always comes back to the evidence room at the police department. And so they facilitate the movement of the evidence and the review of the evidence, making sure the chain of custody is maintained. So there'll be a dedicated team still working with the prosecutors hand in hand, and there'll also be teams out doing follow-up investigations as this moves along.
Yeah, exactly. They'll still be on the case for sure. And it sounds like from what I've heard and what the discussions have been, is that the lead investigators on this case, one is a Moscow police detective and one is an Idaho State Police detective. So they'll be working together. Obviously, the FBI is still assisting. We are still taking your questions, but we need to take a quick break. So keep your questions coming on Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, and on our YouTube chat. Stay with us. I'm Anjanette Levy coming to you live from Moscow, Idaho, and you are watching Law and Crime. Welcome back to the Lunch Show Q&A here on Law and Crime. I'm Anjanette Levy, coming to you live from the airport in Pullman, Washington. This is a regional airport shared by Moscow, Idaho, and Pullman, Washington. We believe Bryan Kohberger will be arriving here. Officials are not commenting on whether or not he will be flying into this airport, but a lot of media, including us, believe this is the most logical place for him to fly into, as he's brought back here from Pennsylvania to answer to those murder charges because it's so close to Moscow, Idaho, right next door. We are taking your questions this hour, but first we want to talk a little bit about what's been going on in this case just in the last 24 hours. A judge in Pennsylvania ordered the extradition of Bryan Kohberger back here to Idaho. That process began earlier this morning as Pennsylvania State Police took custody of Bryan Kohberger and then are now working with other authorities to transport him here to Idaho. After that court appearance, which was very brief yesterday in Monroe County, Pennsylvania, some officials with the Pennsylvania State Police and also the Monroe County District Attorney's Office held a press conference and talked about their role in apprehending Bryan Kohberger. And there were a lot of questions asked about the probable cause affidavit that remains sealed at this time that will outline why officials believe Bryan Kohberger is responsible for these murders. Bryan Kohberger says that he's innocent at this point in time. So listen to Mike Mancuso, the first assistant district attorney of Monroe County, talking about the probable cause affidavit when he was questioned about that.
Yeah, I can't get into the details, sir, but I can say it involved the defendant's connection to a scene of a crime consisting of 4 murdered people. So that's the significance of it.
Can you confirm that there is a connection between Bryan Kohberger and any of the victims?
I can't discuss that, ma'am.
How confident are you that he is guilty of these crimes?
That wouldn't be my place to say. Certainly confident enough that there was ample probable cause for the issuance of the various warrants in the case.
What was your reaction when you heard this? You've all talked about you followed this. This happened states away. When you get that call, or you all get the call, that this person could be right here in your home area, what's your reaction?
Well, I was surprised. Really, Monroe County, of all places. It hits close to home. It's a normal human reaction, I would think, under the circumstances.
And with me this hour, Joe Giacalone, retired New York Police Department Sergeant, and retired FBI agent Bobby Chacon, who's also an attorney. Bobby, I'll start with you on this one. I want to get your thoughts on what Mike Mancuso had to say. Were you surprised he said as much as he did about the probable cause affidavit when it remains sealed?
Well, yeah, I am a little bit, but you can actually see him struggling with each question, and you could see him going over it in his mind about what he's supposed to say and what he's not. And he's in a difficult position. These people, these small county prosecutors, they don't usually have this kind of inundation with media and publicity from around the world. And so I think that he was showing some kind of balance. He was trying to be helpful to the media, but he also knew, you could see the machinations in his mind as he was hearing each question about what he should say and what he couldn't say. I think that the key takeaway of that bit was that he said there was a connection between Bryan Kohberger and the crime scene, and I think that's what we all expect is the DNA. I think we will find in that affidavit the fact that, and this is my speculation, that Bryan Kohberger's DNA was matched to DNA found at the murder scene. And that, I think, at a minimum, is what we'll see in that affidavit. I think you'll see more, but I think that that's what the county prosecutor was alluding to.
And there's been a lot of reporting on that. We haven't been able to confirm that information about the DNA. There's been reporting out there that it went through genealogy because they couldn't get a hit in CODIS. Joe, I'm wondering, were you surprised? I was very interested to hear from the Pennsylvania State Police yesterday about their role in apprehending Bryan Kohberger and how they were contacted to assist with surveillance. But were you surprised that they came out and held this press conference? I felt like they were very open, except there was so much they couldn't say.
Well, I'm not so surprised about that, all right? So here you have a law enforcement agency that has to conduct police operations within their own state, right? So Idaho can't come into Pennsylvania and conduct this kind of investigation. You need the local police to do it, and in this case, the state police. So they had a vital role in this, and they had a part to play in. So no, I mean, like everything else, they can only say so much. But they talked about, how they had to access this place with the search warrant. And it looks to me, from what they did and the time frame that they did it from, they got themselves a no-knock warrant and also a nighttime endorsement where they can go in on off hours. And that's done to preserve evidence and also to help with officer safety, because they might have felt that they might have been at risk if he was going to attack them.
And it was around 1:40, 1:45 in the morning when they went into that house. Late at night, probably they wanted to catch people when they were sleeping, and as you said, concerns about possible destruction of evidence. Let's get back to our viewer questions. Keep them coming on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch. We will get to as many of them as we can. The next one comes from Susan D. from YouTube. She says, so probably asked, what do you think of the gag order? No more pressers from Moscow police. How will we get info? Bobby Chacon, how are we going to get info from now on? Because as of yesterday or even over the weekend, we were in touch with Moscow PD. They sent out a press release at 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon saying some things about the court process. Then hours later, they send out another press release saying gag order, no more information from us. So what do you make of that?
Well, I think you will get a very minimal amount out of. They will be able to say certain things, but not stuff that's directly relevant to the evidence in the case. And I think that's a good thing. I don't think it serves the objective of the prosecution, which is to obtain a conviction by putting a lot of this stuff out in the public. They will adhere to their obligations under the discovery process of turning evidence over to the defense, so the defense can test it and things like that. But I don't think that it serves at this point, now that they have a suspect, a defendant really, in a criminal prosecution, I don't think it serves them or it serves the prosecution's objective of obtaining a conviction by making a lot of it public.
And that's the thing. This is a small county, population 25,000, concerns over seating a possible jury in this county when you have such a small jury pool. And of course, Bryan Kohberger, as Bobby pointed out, he's no longer a suspect. He was a suspect a week and a half ago. He is a defendant now, charged with these murders. So there are concerns about him getting a fair trial, and he's entitled to that as any other criminal defendant is. I still think, personally, I've seen cases that are high profile where you can still get a fair trial, have a fair trial, and not have a gag order in place. But obviously the prosecution and defense here believed they agreed to this. This was a stipulation, so they wanted to do this. I want to ask this next question, Joe, pose this question to you. This question came from, and I lost my little spot here. Yes, Mauve Moon from YouTube. There she is. Mauve Moon is asking, why did the courts order for the evidence in the house to be returned to the family so soon after the murders? The courts didn't determine that, but Joe, after they processed this scene, the cops did go in there and retrieve personal items of the victims. What are your thoughts on them doing that while this was still considered an active crime scene?
Well, me personally, I didn't like that part of it, right? So you have, at that point, when they came in to give the personal property back, to me, that was effectively saying the crime scene is over at this point. You open yourself up to a lot of different defense attorney attacks on this, right? So if you find evidence after the fact, and they say, well, maybe you took evidence out that would have exonerated my client ahead of time. So to me, I didn't think that was a good move, but we understand that the families were very upset that they felt that the police department wasn't meeting their needs and telling them what's going on, and I think that was kind of like something to help put the process along there, right? I might not have done that myself, but considering how quickly this thing came to a close after that, I think he would have been better off waiting for another week or two before doing it.
I thought it was a little odd that they did that. And we know that they had been back in the house after that happened, too. There was some video that was shot by News Nation where you could see them going back into the house with some type of kit. And so there were 2 officers that did that. So I think everybody was a little surprised. It seemed rather fast, even though we know the families wanted those items back. You know, it's a kind thing to do, but was it the right thing to do? We're going to have to wait and see. Let's get to our next question. Emily Flotilla from YouTube asks, Bobby, I'm going to pose this one to you. Who will process the evidence on the car? Will the FBI do it there in Pennsylvania? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's highly possible, particularly because the FBI comes into these cases and just kind of says, here's what we have available, here's the assistance we can provide. You know, they're not in charge, they don't make any big decisions, but they say, here's the things we can do. And so if they had surveillance teams that were needed to work with the Pennsylvania State Police, they would give them that. If they needed that process, the FBI's evidence response team, which is every state has them, and they're all trained to do the same procedure. So the way the evidence response team would process that vehicle in Pennsylvania is the same as it would process it in Idaho. And anytime you move evidence, particularly move something like a car, thousands of miles in the middle of winter across the northern plains of the United States, you have chances of weather affecting it and things like that. So I think that the FBI probably, hopefully, processed that car where it was in Pennsylvania. You know, when I worked here in Los Angeles, and I worked next door to the FBI's evidence response team because I ran the underwater evidence response team, they had car lifts, and they would actually put the car on these car lifts like you'd see in a mechanic shop, and they would go through that car with a fine-tooth comb and get everything they could from it. So I anticipate that a crime scene team, either FBI or state police in Pennsylvania, probably processed that car as close to the scene of its seizure as they could.
It would seem like the smartest and the wisest thing to do, for sure. I'm going to couch this next question, Joe. I'm going to pose it to you, but I'm going to couch it with the fact that Bryan Kohberger is innocent until proven guilty. That's his status right now. But I think a lot of people have been asking this question, given what's going on here with this case. Mary Ann S. from YouTube asks, is Bryan's DNA being tested to see if any other unsolved murders, if it's linked to any unsolved murders? Do you think that's happening, Joe?
Well, absolutely. I mean, part of any investigation, and I've done these a lot of times with my groups, you always look to see if your case is connected to something else. So what we refer to as a pattern case, which is basically 2 more alike similarities. And you look to see if, of course, the number one thing, suspect DNA, is something that can connect your cases. So absolutely, you know, and listen, we're going to be looking not only in Washington, we're going to be looking in Idaho, and now we're going to be looking in Pennsylvania. So this is going to be a vast investigation to try to put this up. And Bobby will be able to tell you further, but we have VICAP, right, from the FBI, the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. I'm sure that has been used to see if there's any similarities in cases of anywhere that this individual has lived in his lifetime, because it is important to make sure that you can tie him to other cases if they are available.
And we know that his DNA wasn't in CODIS as recently as last week, but I would assume if it's not in there now, it will be entered at some point. Let's go to just one more question, and then we have to take a quick break. This one's from Courtney Bellamy from YouTube. Bobby, you're also an attorney as well as being a retired FBI agent. Do you believe there will be a change of venue request from the defense?
It's hard to say. I think that, you know, they do happen sometimes. It all depends on, like you said, I think that massive publicity in this case, I don't know that you could find a jurisdiction where this case has not been covered heavily, and you're not going to find a jury pool that hasn't been, you know, aware of this case. It's just going to be impossible. So I think that the request might come. Whether it's granted or not, I don't know. I don't think it will be, because I don't think there's been a very prejudicial coverage of this. I think it's been fair coverage. Even since Bryan has been arrested, I think everybody's been fairly careful in asserting his assumption of innocence. And so I think that I don't think there's been a lot of prejudicial coverage of this case, particularly in that local jurisdiction. I think it's been covered fairly objectively across the board, nationwide, if not worldwide.
Of course, and he's innocent until proven guilty. And really, we only know what we know about him. We don't know that much about him other than the fact that he was a 28-year-old PhD student at Washington State, just down the road from where I'm standing right now in criminology, criminal justice. We've heard from former classmates of his, but other than that, we really don't know anything about him. Just we've heard what former classmates and others have said. So, you know, I think that the coverage probably has been pretty fair, especially in this area. I don't know how people think of other outlets that have been covering it. So we'll have to wait and see. I wouldn't be surprised if it happens, but we'll just have to wait until that motion is filed, if it is ever filed. Keep your questions coming on Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube. We're going to take a quick break. I'm Anjanette Levy coming to you live from Moscow, Idaho, and you are watching Law and Crime. Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Anjanette Levy, and we are coming to you live from Moscow, Idaho. We're actually at the airport that's in between Moscow and Pullman, Washington. This is where we expect Bryan Kohberger to arrive sometime today by plane as he is extradited from Pennsylvania to Idaho to come back here to answer to those murder charges. Bryan Kohberger is a 28-year-old PhD student from Washington State University, just down the road from where I'm standing right now. He is charged with the murders of Kaylee Gonsalves, Maddie Mogan, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle, all four of them stabbed to death in the King Road home in Moscow, Idaho on November 13th. We want to take a listen to a little bit of what happened yesterday after the extradition hearing for Bryan Kohberger in Monroe County, Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania State Police and the district attorney there held a press conference and talked about their role in assisting Moscow PD, the FBI, and Idaho State Police in apprehending and surveilling Bryan Kohberger after he arrived in Pennsylvania for the Christmas break sometime after December 15th of this year, or last year rather. So let's listen to what Sergeant Christopher Paris from the Pennsylvania State Police had to say about their involvement and when they were contacted about assisting with this case.
So I would say, I would answer the question this way. I don't want to get into a timeline in terms of when we were notified by the FBI and when the surveillance began. Obviously, we know on Thursday night into Friday morning is when the warrants were served. I would say, as a credit to the professionals both standing behind me and others not here, many others not here, the information was held very close. And we did not want to have any situation where Mr. Kohberger potentially would be tipped off. So as a result of that, I would say a close number of approximately 7 to 8 individuals, maybe 10 on the most within the PSP side of this operation knew about it.
And for days, can we say? Or?
I would say for a period of time. I would not feel comfortable commenting any more than that, for a period of time. And then as the tactical assets were brought in, people were...
And that was Christopher Paris from the Pennsylvania State Police answering a question about when they were called to assist the FBI and Moscow PD with surveilling and apprehending Bryan Kohberger. With me is Bobby Chacon, a retired FBI agent and attorney, and Joe Giacalone, a retired NYPD sergeant. So, Bobby, I'm going to ask you about what Christopher Paris had to say. He won't get into the timeline, but obviously Moscow PD, they needed help with this. We know the FBI was involved with this as well in the surveillance. So, asking Pennsylvania State Police to assist with this, why wouldn't the FBI just handle this on their own? Why would they need Pennsylvania State Police to come in and assist with it?
Well, it depends on the manpower needs. 24/7 surveillance, if you're going to do it even for a couple of days, even for 4 or 5 days, think about it. A surveillance team is anywhere from 8 to 10 people, in different vehicles if you're doing that kind of surveillance so you don't get seen. That's 3 shifts of that. You're talking about, a person in each vehicle at 8 or 10 people. You're talking about 30, 40, 50 people with days off and stuff if you start doing this, 24/7 for 4 or 5 days. And so I think that the manpower needs, I think the FBI has really good partnerships with all the state polices. Certainly the Philadelphia office and the Pittsburgh office in Pennsylvania have good, one of my FBI classmates was a former Pennsylvania State Police trooper, and I'm sure they have good working relationships, and they just reached out and said, look, we need some people, we need some help with this is what we're doing, and I'm sure they've worked together before in the past. And so it's just a natural thing when you're going into an endeavor that's very manpower intensive, which surveillance is. It's very manpower intensive, and so I think it's natural to partner up with the state police in that kind of thing.
And Joe, this surveillance I'm always really intrigued by this. This was a gated community where he lived. So, or at least where his parents lived and where he was staying over that Christmas break. So I was thinking to myself last week, wow, how did they hang out in a gated community to do surveillance on this guy? I'm assuming they were parked down the street or parked somewhere where they could see the house. And then maybe if he left, they were following him. So how do you do that? How do you make sure you're kind of like, hidden in plain sight when you're inside a gated community where you're not expecting to see people unless they live there or maybe the Amazon driver?
Yeah, you have to be real careful with a closed-end community like that because they will be able to spot strangers right away. Specifically, if you're, worried about people looking for you, you're paranoid. It's something that you might be keyed on. But listen, law enforcement is very resourceful. I doubt that they, said we were looking for a specific person, but I'm sure they were given access to the community gate through the security of it. And they're saying we're conducting an investigation, and no security is going to say no, but it wasn't specific. So, and like Bobby said, I mean, the amount of personnel that you need to do this, including the vehicles, right? So you want to change up your vehicles when you can, so that people don't see the same, blue Ford or whatever it might, whatever car they decide to use. So they want to try to use some nondescript cars, meaning cars that don't look like police cars, and in different personnel, right? Getting different looks out there. And yes, they had people probably at each intersection area, parking lot, so if that he was on the move, that they could pick up the tail and then could drop off when they pass another point, so that the person doesn't look in their rearview mirror and see the same car for the last 10 miles and making every turn that they're making. So this is done by people who have done it before. I've been on some surveillances, whatever, and it could be very long, boring, and drawn out, and no bathroom breaks, nothing to eat. It's not like in television where they're getting pizzas delivered to the side of the car, right? So it's a long night too, especially for the midnight crew.
It really sounds like something out of a movie. And I once had a police officer tell me, who had been in the business a long time, tell me that, you never leave your car running. That's when you're doing surveillance. I don't know if that's true, but I just thought that was funny. It popped into my head. We have a really good question coming to us from Bobby Swain, and we are taking your questions. So keep them coming to us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube. Bobby Swain from YouTube asks, were the 2 traffic stops part of the surveillance? And Bobby is talking about those 2 traffic stops that pretty much happened back to back on December 15th in Indiana. They were stopped. Bryan Kohberger, driving cross country with his father in the white Hyundai Elantra, stopped by a county police department. It was the Hancock County Sheriff's Department, actually, and an Indiana State Police trooper following too closely. Was this part of the surveillance, Bobby Chacon? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, definitely it could be. I mean, I've used that ruse in the past. When I worked gangs in New York City, my partner was an NYPD detective. He had a citywide radio. We could often have a radio car, an RMP, come by and do a stop, a pretend stop. Oh, you rolled through a stop sign, or you didn't full stop on red before you turned right, or speeding, or whatever it is, to identify people in the vehicle, get IDs on people, see what's going on, see who the vehicle's registered to. For any number of reasons, if you want that vehicle stopped, we were always able to enlist the assistance of the NYPD, of a marked unit, and make that stop and get that information. So it is a ruse that we use. I've used it myself. Whether or not it was used in this case, I don't know. I think if it was used in this case, I don't think both were a stop. Like this particular stop with the video, I don't think this was, because he didn't do some of the things that I would think he would do if they asked him to stop. So it all depends. Like, if, for example, if they're looking for his DNA, they might have him use the officer's pen to sign the warning citation that he gives them, and the officer gets the pen back and puts it in a baggie, whatever that is. And also, you wouldn't want to do 2 stops close together, because that might raise up the person you're trying to get information from. So you'd only want to do 1 stop. You wouldn't do 2. And in that video, that Officer 1 video, you hear him say, "Oh, we were just stopped by the state police." And he says, "State police? Well, we don't have, SUVs. It must have been a local guy." So So already they're thinking, why are we getting pulled over so many times in a short period of time? So I think definitely one of them could be. I doubt both of them were.
One odd thing from that video, and I just want to mention this, I thought it was odd, and some followers on Twitter pointed this out to me as well. They didn't even ask for his license. I thought that was a little weird, that they didn't ask for his license and run him or anything like that. Not that anything would have showed up, but that didn't happen. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to continue to take your questions, so keep them coming to us. But we'll be right back. You are watching Law and Crime, coming to you live from Moscow, Idaho. Welcome back. I'm Anjanette Levy, and we are in Moscow, Idaho, actually kind of right on the state line with Pullman, Washington. And we are taking your questions live here from the airport, where we are expecting Bryan Kohberger to land possibly sometime later today. We are taking your questions live, so keep them coming to us. I want to get right to your questions. One of these is really interesting to me. It comes from Jennifer Waters from YouTube. And Joe, I'm wondering what you think about this. Jennifer asks, surely if they find traces of blood in his car, that is clearly a guilty verdict right there. Is that the case?
Hi, Jennifer. Well, it's definitely going to help the case for sure, right? So there is no way that he was able to go into a location, murder these 4 people brutally with a knife, stepping in all that blood, carrying it with him, right? So that low cards exchange principle, the theory of transfer of evidence between 2 individuals, and then getting into that car and driving away. But there's going to be a lot of other things that I believe will also help. For instance, when he returns back home, was there surveillance video at the location in Washington? Do we have any videos of him or stills of him, what he looked like, what was he wearing? Did it look like there was any signs of blood on him? That would help. And of course, they did over 300 interviews. So do the interviews put him at the scene? Maybe he was, hanging around with some of the other kids from the neighborhood there and was invited to parties, and that's how he knew them. So we're going to hopefully find that out also. And also remember, too, there's something very specific, and the chief, kind of talked about this, where we've tied him to the victims, and that could be because of the fact that, remember, they said they bagged the hands. When you have an up close and personal attack like this, and we've already know that there was defensive wounds on a few of the victims, that there was a chance that the victim scratched him, and then had that DNA under their fingernails, and I think that will also help. So you tie all these pieces together, all this investigation, and that's how you put a case with a nice bow on top of it for a prosecutor.
Most definitely. And 300 interviews, that's a lot of interviews. I don't know if people understand just exactly how long that would take and how much material that is. Our next question, Bobby, comes from Judge Mental, not judgmental, Judge Mental from Twitter. And Judge Mental asks, will the defense be likely to ask that files remain sealed in this case?
Yes, I think they will, because they get access to everything, obviously, and even if it's sealed, obviously. But the defense probably wants the least amount of the file out in public because it could taint the jury pool, and if it's if parts of the file really point to his guilt, and the prosecution probably wants the same thing. They want to keep that from the public. They don't want this looked over and over and over again. And of course, like I said, the defense will have access to everything that the prosecution has through the discovery process. There are no gotcha moments in court, or very few, like they show on TV, because the defense generally will have access to everything and in advance, well in advance, that the prosecution intends to use at trial. So I think it's possible. I think that the defense might ask for that, but they're going to ask for a lot of things, and they're going to try to, like the previous question about the blood in the car. This case cannot hang on one piece of evidence or one incident or one thing. When you're asking a jury, particularly if they do seek the death penalty, when you're asking the jury to invoke the death penalty, the bar is just that much higher. It's still beyond a reasonable doubt, but now you're asking the jury to put someone to death, and so I think that becomes a higher bar, and so I think this is going to have to rest on many, many different pieces of evidence, but I think they have them.
Very interesting. Mad Marsha has a question. I'll take this one. Are they sure that this is the airport they're flying into? We're not sure, but we think it's the most likely. So that's that one. And then we literally have probably 20 seconds left. Bobby Swain asks again, Joe, where the car was between November 13th and December 15th and why nobody saw it. It's possible, Joe, don't you think, just briefly, that maybe somebody did see it and didn't put it together?
Exactly. I mean, who knows? The car could be moved around at different locations in and around that area there. I mean, we're talking very rural from what I've seen. Yeah. I've never been there, but it looks very rural. So, yeah, well, it could be easily hidden.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Joe. Thanks, Bobby. And thank you. We will keep you posted on the web. Have a good afternoon.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Law&Crime Network. I'm Michael Bryant, and Happy New Year. I think I may be pushing the statute of limitations on that salutation, but get those out of your system by the end of the week, and then, I mean, come on, you got to move on. You got, Groundhog Days coming up. Anyway, good to see you in the new year, and our coverage of that case. You know, I can't think of a name that's more on the lips of everybody across this country, maybe around the world, than Bryan Kohberger, now that that name has settled in to be connected to the deaths of those 4 University of Idaho students stabbed to death in their off-campus home back in November. Authorities have arrested this 28-year-old, kind of a creepy-looking dude. He is now charged with those brutal murders. Not officially charged yet because he was taken into custody in Monroe County, Pennsylvania. That was on the 30th of December. Waived extradition. Yesterday we had that. Let me just say before I get too deep into today, C.R. Gillespie was out there. Of course, Anjanette Levy in Idaho, both doing a tremendous job. And I was able to just sit back and enjoy eating bonbons on my couch. So good job to everybody involved in that as we continue to follow this case. And right now, I believe he's probably en route by aeroplane, and as long as he's not on Spirit Airlines, probably going to get to Idaho pretty soon. And of course, Anjanette is on the ground there, and will keep us posted if that does take place anytime soon here. When it does, we will bring that to you. So now he will face those charges. That'll happen when he arrives in Idaho. Interesting, he gets his dad to fly from Pennsylvania out to the great Northwest to hop in the car with the kid. Hey, Dad, Daddy, can you ride with me, ride shotgun? Because I'm really trying to evade authorities, just my theory. And he does. En route from the Northwest to Pennsylvania, the car is stopped a couple of times on December 15th, once by a county trooper, once by a local sheriff, and never given a ticket, but, asked about speeding and following too close, which is what a bizarre stop that is. Come on. Some might think it was part of the whole FBI tracking plan. We just don't know. But they were in that infamous white Hyundai Elantra. And I feel sorry for you if you have a white Hyundai Elantra, because I'm sure the Blue Book value has plummeted. But they were in that car when it was pulled over. Let's take a look at some of the body cam footage. We'll talk about it on the other side.
I stopped you when you were driving by me there. You're a little too close to the back of that semi. In the back.
Okay, first of all, if you have 2 minutes, 10 seconds of your life you can't ever get back, you can watch the rest of that video of the door handle of the white Elantra. I'm not sure why the body cam was situated as it was with this trooper, so that you get nothing but below the window line of the car. Just an adjustment to be made, just a suggestion perhaps. It would have been so nice to see the reactions of Kohberger and his dad during this Q&A, because they talked kind of congenially about, hey, if you want to not get a ticket or pulled over for traveling too close to another vehicle, you got to figure 1 car space per 10 miles per hour. You're going 70, that's 7. I mean, it was a nothing conversation in terms of any liability for the way he was driving, but it makes you wonder why in the heck that was going on. So rather than just kind of speculate about this, let's talk to my guests. They're much better at doing this than I am. I have criminal defense attorney Alalay Cameron and criminal defense attorney Jeffrey Wolf. Jeffrey of Denver, Alalay of Los Angeles. Thank you both for being here. I appreciate it. Alalay, let me ask you this. Is this just part of the old FBI tracking of this guy as he crossed the country, or was it pure coincidence that 2 different law enforcement agencies in Indiana pulled this car over?
We're not going to know until we actually get into the evidence. And sometimes you don't even know unless sometimes these are called wall stops. There's information going from one agency to another agency. We're not necessarily going to know, but it's a little peculiar that he stopped twice on the same day. I think the news outlets are telling us that they didn't know, the law enforcement agencies didn't know anything about the Elantra, but I find that rather suspicious. Seems to me like there was an APB out looking for a white Elantra. So your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah, I mean, was there anybody really at that point in the process? It was, the murders took place on the 13th of November. The car became an issue a few weeks later. I can't imagine there's any law enforcement agency anywhere that didn't at least have a clue that was the particular vehicle that was being looked for. Jeff, what do you think about this? And is it just a whole conspiracy theory, or is it just the greatest coincidence ever?
Well, honestly, it could be either, and I know you want us to pick, but it's hard to do because we have so little information from law enforcement here. It is certainly odd to see somebody stopped for following too close, unless you've represented people in rural jurisdictions where that's really all the police have to do is to try and keep the highway safe. So it's not something, and you see they're in the middle of nowhere. So when you're out there, it's not something that you're going to see as an unusual reason for somebody to be pulled over. What is unusual to me is that if you're driving cross country, knowing that you potentially are being investigated for murdering 4 people, that you're going to speed and follow too closely. You might want to follow the rules of the road, at least be as good as the DUI driver going 5 miles per hour under the speed limit. Get it together, man. This guy is having a very tough time keeping it together. There's the reports that in the jails, he's exposing himself to other female inmates that are in there, that he's telling the deputies in the jail that he's going to cut them like he cut those kids. This is a guy who thinks he's smarter than he is based on his own behavior, because when you're leaving to drive cross country, don't speed.
So that is your official tip. Go 5 miles under the speed limit if you're driving under the influence. Of course, we're not suggesting anybody drive under the influence. But, yes, it makes perfect sense. You're going to be extra careful in how you follow the simplest of rules. But it also leads you to wonder, were they just going to do one of those your registration is out of date. Just looking for a reason to pull this car over so they could see if it, in fact, contained the guy they were looking for. You're right, Alalay. We may not know that till the end of this case. After the extradition hearing yesterday, Pennsylvania State Police held a press conference. They wanted to talk about Kohberger's arrest. Let's listen to this. This is Monroe County Assistant District Attorney Mike Mancuso.
I want to give my condolences to the families of the victims out in Idaho for their loss. It's my sincere hope that this marks a clear step in the right direction of effectuating justice for those folks. My office's role was relatively recent. We weren't advised of the presence of the defendant in our county until only a couple days before the apprehension of the defendant. But when we were told, we came together and worked very closely with Captain Kramer, who did an excellent job in almost like a clockwork operation. Part of my duties were to ensure that 3 separate search warrants were issued. Those affidavits attached to those search warrants are still under seal, so I can't discuss their contents with you. But one was for the person of Mr. Kohberger, collecting DNA and photographs, that sort of thing. One was for the white Elantra vehicle, which I understand has been seized and is being processed, and one was for the address, the residence itself that he was living in with his family. I was at the scene, and I have to say that Major Paris and Captain Norm Kramer did an outstanding job in coordinating the efforts, not only of the numerous Pennsylvania State police troopers there, but officers from other jurisdictions and disciplines within those jurisdictions to make this a very smooth, highly competent professional operation. It is a quirk, apparently. It's not in the norm of the states I'm familiar with that Idaho does not release their probable cause affidavit in support of their arrest warrant until after their defendant is returned to that state. But having read those documents and the sealed affidavits of probable cause, I definitely believe that one of the main reasons the defendant chose to waive extradition and hurry his return back to Idaho was the need to know what was in those documents. So that's a significant development. Beyond that, looking at the scope of the situation and the ties this defendant has to my county, I would hold our office at the disposal of the Idaho authorities to help facilitate a complete background investigation into the defendant, both activities prior to the murders occurring within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and his activities after the murders in Pennsylvania. So we stand ready to assist with that effort on an ongoing basis. Thank you. Yeah, I can't get into the details, sir, but I can say it involved the defendant's connection to a scene of a crime consisting of 4 murdered people. So that's the significance of it.
Can you confirm that there is a connection between Bryan Kohberger and any of the victims?
I can't discuss that, ma'am.
How confident are you that he is guilty of these crimes?
That wouldn't be my place to say. Certainly confident enough that there was ample probable cause for the issuance of the various warrants in the case.
What was your reaction when you heard this? You've all talked about you followed this. This happened states away. When you get that call, or you all get the call, that this person could be right here in your home area, what's your reaction?
Well, I was surprised. Really, Monroe County of all places. It hits close to home. It's a normal human reaction, I would think, under the circumstances.
So there's the ADA who has relinquished custody of Bryan Kohberger, and again, we believe he's en route to Idaho at this time, and we, of course, will keep you posted if he touches down there. Anjanette Levy there. You do not want Anjanette Levy on your tail, I'm telling you that. So I want to mention something that, Jeff, you brought up when we last chatted here, and that was the reference to alleged jail activities that the defendant carried out. There were some stories about him threatening to urinate on a guard's face, to exposing himself. We don't know if these stories are true or not. We do know that the authorities for the jail have said he's been a model detainee. He hasn't done anything weird. But some have pontificated that if he did take part of these weird activities, threatening people, singing rap songs with a lot of profanity, exposing himself, that it was setting up some sort of insanity defense, which I'm sure you guys know ain't going to go too far in Idaho because they got rid of the insanity defense back in the mid-'80s after John Hinckley used that defense to avoid charges or criminal liability when he shot at and wounded President Reagan. So a lot of states, Idaho one of them, said we don't want that to be an escape hatch for defendants on any level. So there is no insanity defense there. So if that's true, Jeff, what's your take on the alleged behavior of Bryan Kohberger while in detention there in Pennsylvania?
Well, you're right. The insanity defense has been eviscerated across the country almost uniformly. But what has not changed across America is what people are taught in school, right? Some of us went to law school, right? Everybody here. And in law school, you learn a lot of theories and a lot of things that are part of common law and a lot of things that are no longer active in the criminal justice system today. And then you graduate and you learn actually how things work. And this guy is in a criminology course load on his master's. And so my guess is he's learning a lot about the insanity defense there. And you learn about it. You're darn right you learn about it, and then you get out and you read the case law and you realize, oh, that's not exactly the way it works, like everything else you learn in school. You get to the real world and learn how things actually work. And so if he was sitting and learning about insanity defenses and trying to make it look as if he doesn't know what's going on, he's going to have a pretty rude awakening when he touches down and meets with his public defender in Idaho, assuming he's represented by a public defender there, as he was in Pennsylvania. It's got a pretty rude awakening coming his way.
Yeah, we believe on the representation front, they only had a couple of PDs, public defenders there that weren't conflicted out. They only had 4 total. But apparently from a neighboring county, I think it's called Kootenai, Ann Taylor has apparently been appointed, at least as interim public defender, a provisional attorney, I think they call it there. LLA, everybody's dying to get their hands on the affidavit that led to probable cause, therefore the arrest warrant. And I'm sure you've seen soup to nuts what we've come to expect in these things, from very little to voluminous. What do you expect in this case?
Well, we know that from what has been released so far, and there's not much that has been released. We know that these gruesome murders took place with the use of a knife. So we know that there must be DNA evidence. We know that there must be some kind of trace evidence somewhere in the car or on Kohberger's vicinity, wherever that is. And that would probably explain the 3 search warrants, the house, I think his parents' house, and the third, the car. So the affidavit is probably going to spell out in greater detail what the investigators did uh, to follow the trail that eventually led them to Kohberger. I'm interested, I think, in the next few days, once the attorney is appointed and she steps into the case and the evidence is somewhat released to her, I think we might get a glimpse, although I'm not so sure that the defense is going to release, and I'm not so sure that the government is going to release a lot of evidence to the public just yet, until and unless we get into evidentiary hearings. But I think the greatest question right now and the greatest lead for us to understand what happened with this case is the DNA evidence.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that, I want to talk about that too, because, you know, familial DNA has become a huge thing. Let's take a quick break, talk about how that worked in this case, and how you, if you've signed on to one of these genealogy websites, you might be giving up some rights of your own that maybe you don't even know about. Let's talk about that after a quick break. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. We're still covering the case of Idaho versus Kohberger. It will officially be slated that soon when he arrives in Idaho, and charges are officially filed against him. The extradition from Pennsylvania, really not a big deal. It's a show up. Yeah, that's me. That's my name. I'm not fighting about it, which any attorney with a pea brain would convince their client not to fight about. So now he's en route to Idaho. Yesterday, after the extradition hearing, press conference, speaking to the press there about what their role had been in the process, is an officer from the state police, I believe it is. This is Mr. Paris.
Area 3 comprises troops F, P, N, and R, and is made up of 1,000 approximately of the women and men, civilian and enlisted, in the northeastern part of Pennsylvania. I'd like to introduce to my left Captain Norm Kramer, who's the commander of Troop N Hazleton, which is comprised of Carbon, Monroe, Columbia, and parts of Luzerne counties. I would like to reiterate, as the colonel said, that Idaho law prohibits any release of information contained within the affidavits. So we're going to do our best today to talk about what phase we are currently in the investigation, and it has entered a new phase with the waiver for extradition. And the continuing primary goal is the seeking of justice through successful prosecution and conviction, bearing the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So with that in mind, we're trying to balance essentially two things: the public's desire for information against the need to maintain the integrity of the investigation and protect the suspects, accused at this point's due process. So I'll now attempt to give you an operational picture with the best information I can release at the time. So this begins when the Pennsylvania State Police Bureau of Criminal Investigation troopers were contacted by the FBI about assisting with surveillance of the accused in this case. I'd like to take the opportunity to specifically thank several individuals. Special Agent in Charge Jackie McGuire and Assistant Special Agent in Charge Dave Carter from the Philadelphia Field Division, as well as Supervisory Special Agent Bill Vigorito of the Scranton RA. We're very lucky in PSP to have a collaborative relationship with the Bureau, both in Pennsylvania and beyond, and their people are absolutely excellent. So as the investigation progressed, Troop N Criminal Investigation Section, commanded by Captain Kramer over my left shoulder here, began to collaborate with authorities in Idaho. Specifically, I'd like to acknowledge Lieutenant James Curto, who is here today, Sergeant Anthony Ferdinand, Corporal John Chulak, who is not present with us, and Troopers Leary and Knoll, who are here with us today. It was through this collaboration and the charges pending in Idaho that those troopers were able to obtain search warrants and a fugitive from justice warrant that was prepared here in Monroe County for the location in Chestnut Hill Township and the fugitive from justice warrant for Mr. Kohberger, respectively. I'd like to acknowledge the Monroe County District Attorney, David Christine, as well as First Assistant Mike Mancuso and their entire office. The support that we received was absolutely excellent. Once those warrants were obtained, the Bureau of Emergency and Special Operations, BESO, coordinates our Special Emergency Response Team, CERT. They were selected to serve those warrants, the 3 search warrants and the fugitive from justice warrant. To define what CERT is, it's a full-time tactical team maintained by PSP to deal with high-risk warrant situations, barricades, and other incidents requiring specialized tactical training or other capabilities. From their perspective, we essentially task them to go out and serve a arrest warrant for someone accused of a quadruple murder. They're activated several hundred times a year throughout the Commonwealth. We don't typically hear of their work in a forum like this because they serve the warrant, the person's taken into custody, and they go about their assignment. They are the ultimate professionals. It's a volunteer team. They're highly trained and highly motivated. Captain Norm Kramer, over my left shoulder, was assigned as the top comm for the CERT activation, which means he was responsible for coordinating our tactical preparations. So, tactical assets were then staged in the county, in Monroe County, into the evening of Thursday, December 29th, last Thursday. And in the early hours of Friday, December 30th, those warrants were executed at the location. Mr. Kohberger was taken into custody without incident. The scene was turned over to the FBI Evidence Response Team for processing. Mr. Kohberger was then turned over to the Monroe County Prison, where he has remained in their custody since. I'd like to thank the Monroe County Sheriff and the Stroud Regional Police Department for their support as well during the extradition process. Arrangements currently are being made to deliver Kohberger back to Idaho, where he can have continued due process and face these charges. Ongoing investigation, ma'am.
Has a motive been determined?
I can't comment on that either. I apologize.
Who transports him, sir? Does Pennsylvania State Police, the Monroe County Sheriff's Department?
He's presently back. He was transported from the courthouse by Monroe County Sheriff, And the logistics of who's going to transport him out to Idaho are still being discussed. We don't know yet.
Can you confirm the time of his arrest and how much law enforcement presence there actually was?
I would say it was in the early morning hours of Friday, December 30th. Tactical assets on scene were probably in the neighborhood of 50.
Were you afraid he was going to get tipped off before you got him?
I would say overall about this entire operation, and the credit goes, this is a part that the state police played humbly. You look at Moscow Police Department, 38 sworn, 19,000 leads, the video evidence that they had to develop in order to put that out, all public source information. But when you talk about the service of a high-risk warrant for someone who's committed or alleged to have committed 4 homicides, there's nothing routine about that. And all of those tactical steps that were taken were in conjunction with the best efforts of the authorities, local, state, and federal, both in Idaho and here, to ensure that we could do it safely and to ensure that we could get him into custody and that those service or the search warrants could occur. I wouldn't comment on what his present sense was. I would just comment that the professionalism of the CERT team and their tactical training definitely proved in a situation like this to do it in the most tactically sound and fastest way possible.
Was there anybody else in the house at the time?
His parents were in the house at the time.
Did they say anything to you?
Again, present sense impression. I can't comment on that. An ongoing investigation.
Did you break down the door?
Force was used. The warrants were issued for evening search warrants, which in Pennsylvania requires additional probable cause in order to serve them at the hours of darkness. I would defer to the first assistant to talk about the legal burden that you bear in order to obtain those. But from a tactical standpoint, based upon all of the briefings that we had developed and all of the intelligence we had developed, we thought that was the best time to serve it.
And what tipped off that Pennsylvania was involved with this?
We were alerted by the FBI. Troopers in the Bureau of Criminal Investigation were alerted.
Anything on like his social media pages that tipped anything?
I can't comment. I don't know.
So has your parents been cooperative in this whole process?
Can't comment. Ongoing, like I said. The state police's role here was to serve the warrants and assist with the surveillance, which we've done. We've been part of major investigations. These are men and women who take an oath to protect their communities and the Commonwealth here. We're very humbled with the opportunity that we had, given a case that has really gained international attention, to play a small part in it. And our hat is off to Moscow PD, again, with the size and the complexity of this investigation and the work that they've done to get us here today. And this is only the beginning of the next step.
So from the state police, there's Sergeant Christopher Paris, and the only question you would get a complete answer to is, please would you identify each and every agency that had any role of any kind in the apprehension of Mr. Kohberger? Otherwise, we can't really tell you a whole heck of a lot. And they should be proud of what they've done. There's certainly that kind of award speech. I'm accepting the award on behalf of all these agencies that found this guy. I want to talk about what led to at least the initiation of that warrant, and that was the familial DNA that we first learned about back in the Golden State Killer days, guys. Jeffrey Wolf was with me, Alalay Cameron. So I've got here, we believe it was one of the, I'll call the lesser known sites. It wasn't 23andMe, it wasn't Ancestry.com. I think it might have been GED Match, which was the one also used for the Golden State Killer. My point is that people sign up for these all the time. They pay their whatever the fee is. They don't really realize what they might be doing because law enforcement just taps into the database. They share the DNA they found at the scene, which didn't show up in CODIS or any more traditional law enforcement database, but they find a hit in these, I'll call civilian databases. And in this one, GED Match, it does tell you, if somebody bothers to read through it, we have taken steps to protect user privacy and data security, including offering the option to opt out of law enforcement searches, which means unless you actively opt out, you're in. You're in the mix. Now, personally, if they can find a criminal based on my DNA, God bless them. I'm fine. I'm not looking to protect anybody in the family if they've done anything wrong. But Alalay, what do you think about this form of law enforcement? It's been controversial. It is more assailable than traditional DNA, but what are your thoughts?
Okay, so it depends on your personal feelings as a citizen. We cherish our right to be free from search and seizure. We cherish our way of life to have privacy. So it's a personal choice, and it is a personal responsibility when we submit our DNA to any kind of a database, I think it is part of our personal responsibility as a citizen to safeguard that right of privacy that we cherish so much. But if we're not going to care, and if we're not going to cherish it, and we're not going to safeguard it, then the other side of it is that some law enforcement agency is going to use our evidence that we failed to secure to do their investigation. I'm not so sure that it is wrong by the police department to use what is available at their fingertips to conduct their investigation. That's why they're there. They have the law. As long as they follow the law, God be with them. You know, they have to do a job. But I think personally, as private citizens, we need to do what we are obligated to do on our end to safeguard our personal liberties.
Yep, I think there's a pretty good chance people don't read that stuff. If they're into it, they pay, they do their thing. I just think it's important, maybe read that so you can make the choice that you suggest, Alaleh.
Absolutely.
So, Jeffrey, we know what happens then. They get this connection, now they got the guy in custody, they're going to get his DNA, and then bing, they can match it to what they found at the site. Is that your understanding of what might happen here?
Well, it's so much more nefarious than that, because it's not necessarily his personal choice to put his DNA on there, and because he didn't protect it, he's not doing his duty to himself. They are going at people up to the 4th degree, and I'm sure it'll move further out over time. So that means that my 4th cousin in some city who I've never heard of, I've never met, they decide they want to know what their 23andMe is or any of these sites, and God forbid I've done something, suddenly I am caught by some relative's decision. This is within the bounds of the law, okay? But what's within the bounds of the law doesn't make it right. This is a privacy interest that we all have. It'd be as if my relatives could suddenly give the password to my phone and let the cops into my phone. No, this is mine. I choose who gets to see it. My DNA should be no different. To say that you can go in and let somebody else's choice, who you've had zero say-so in, decide what happens to your DNA is ridiculous. It's as if my neighbors could put my trash on the corner for me and decide what I leave out there for public viewing. This is really dangerous. This is the wave of the future. This is why I have begged my wife not to do this, and she still did it, because you never know who you're turning in and for what. And that's a huge, huge problem. It's something that privacy advocates are not involved in. It's something our Congress is not talking about, and it's something that we should be, because if we do value DNA as evidence, we need to make sure, number one, it's above board. Like you said, they don't have the same storage requirements that the government does. And number two, we need to make sure that our DNA is private, in the sense that it's not always going to be law enforcement digging their claws into it. It's going to be eventually private companies digging their claws into it to use DNA as they see fit. And you're right, nobody reads this fine print. Nobody reads when you get an email saying that the fine print's been updated, okay? And you can't be expected to. It's too long. Most people are not lawyers, and they can't even understand what's in front of them. This is so dangerous, and I couldn't be more against it if I tried.
Yeah, I got that feeling, Jeff. I'm starting to wonder about your background. So it makes me wonder, too, what the overall philosophy might be from the public. I would think, until we start seeing, and it could happen, a lot of arrests that end up with not guilty verdicts based on the trail they used, the DNA to get there. When we find, the Golden State Killer after decades found guilty as a result of this familial DNA to track him. We have now Bryan Kohberger, and there have been many others. If he is determined to be the guilty party in this case, I think the general consensus across the country is going to be, I'm okay with this. I'm okay if they use this. I really need to make a decision for me and myself and my family. But assuming I'm okay with it for my purposes, I'm okay with it for law enforcement purposes. So it is a controversial thing. Hey, the law is an ever-changing thing. It's living and breathing, and we'll see how this goes. There may be some legislation down the road. Let's take a break. We'll come back more on the Bryan Kohberger case. Again, we believe he is en route to Idaho at this moment. We'll keep you posted. Stay where you are. And welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Michael Bryant. So we're continuing our coverage of what will be Idaho versus Bryan Kohberger when he arrives in that state, and it should be really any time now. It's 2,000 miles, but not too long a flight, actually. And of course, our Anjanette Levy is there, keeping track on that, and keep us posted on his arrival. You know, some of the family members of the 4 victims, in this case, Kaylee Gonsalves, they've been very vocal and have gotten public statements made through representatives. Shannon Gray represents her family. Let's listen to what he had to say.
I think everybody was relieved. The family was relieved, and it's long from over. The next, that chapter's kind of closed at least, and then now the next chapter starts. The whole criminal justice process, and so I think everyone had a little bit of relief and was able maybe to sleep at night, and then now it's back to the grind again. So basically, that the interview, it maybe wasn't basically set out the way it should have been, but it was. Now that we have a name and we have a person, the family, all the families are going to be looking for connections between all of the victims. So, and if we find any connections between Kaylee or Maddie or Ethan or Xana or any of those, the victims in the case, we'll be relaying all of that information over to the Moscow Police Department. And we're going to allow the Moscow Police Department to determine if they release any information regarding those connections. And I think the Moscow Police Department is really asking from the public, now that there's a face and a name, that get as much information as you can to us about this guy, right? About his habits, things that he was doing, all of that stuff, still asking for community help. Things have changed in some aspect of it, is that they have a person that they've arrested. But the loss of their daughter hasn't changed. The loss that she was murdered and all of those things, that hasn't changed at all. And now you have to have hope. You had hope that they would get an arrest. Now you have to have hope that they're going to get a conviction, that they've done all the things that they needed to do, that they dotted their I's and crossed their T's, and they have evidence that will come in, and we'll get a good hard evidence on this individual, and any additional evidence that they can, circumstantial evidence that they can find that will add to the weight of the direct evidence and the hard evidence on the case. So they're hopeful that will happen. But it's still a long journey. We're nowhere near the end.
Okay, so now we have Bryan Kohberger arrested. We have him en route to Idaho. We expect that the affidavit will be released, and we'll see something that suggests how they got the evidence they needed to issue that arrest warrant. I like to look a little further down the road, though, because I'm curious what's going to happen once he gets to Idaho. Is the case going to take place in that county? Will there be a change of venue? The judge assigned at this point is Megan Marshall. I almost said Meghan Markle, but that would have been a whole different thing. Megan Marshall. And we already know there's been some gag order of some sort issued so that there's not going to be a lot of information leaking out from the law enforcement or prosecutorial departments. But what about a change of venue? I have with me Alalay Cameron and Jeffrey Wolf. Let's first talk about change of venue. It's a small county. Reminds me a lot of Pike County, where we just finished one of the cases against the Wagner family there. They only had about 18,000, 20,000 people in that county with a very small potential jury pool. We're going to see the same thing here. Jeff, what do you think? Do we get, I know there will be a request. Do we get a change of venue here?
Well, I think it's entirely possible because we have seen this happen in other cases. There was one out here in Colorado with the father that murdered his son. He's since been convicted, but they moved that to a neighboring county because when you're talking about a case like this that has garnered national attention, people always say, well, how can you ever find somewhere fair, somewhere where people haven't heard of it? That's not what they're looking at. They're not looking at, have you heard of it? They're looking at, even though you've heard of it, can you still judge the evidence in front of you based on the instructions? And that is significantly harder to do within the county where basically they've been living with a boogeyman, right? Students are withdrawing from school in record numbers and switching to online. They have teachers escorting kids at the local high school to and from their cars. This is a county that has been stranglehold basically by who was this? Are they going to strike again? Why did it happen? That amount of fear, it leads to bias. And so what you really have to do is you have to get in on a motion like that early and try and get a court to say up front that they are going to move it. Because once you get in front of jurors, the instinct is for them to say, of course I can be fair. Of course I will do what the judge says. Because people don't like to admit bias. It's really hard to do. especially on the large scale that you would need to move a case like this through a mistrial on an unfair jury panel. So they're going to need to get in early on that and hope that the judge lets common sense prevail and says, you're right. We've got public defenders with conflicts. We've got a community who's been afraid. It's time to get this to a place where people have a little bit less frayed ends on this case, because that's really what they need.
And I really think you're right in how special this is with the impact on this small community. Remember, the cops initially said, hey, this was targeted, you're all safe, everything's fine, and then they almost immediately retracted that, making it sound like maybe you're not so safe. And so everybody was on maybe a higher alert edge there than they might have been if it were more settled in the apprehension and the targeting of a suspect. So, Alile, related to that, again, Megan Marshall, the judge, is my focus here because she's already issued that gag order of some sort. She's going to make an ultimate decision if it stays in her courtroom whether cameras are allowed. I'm kind of biased about what I think should happen there. And so she would also be hearing any change of venue motion. What's your argument to keep it in that county?
Let me just first respond to the first part of the question. According to Idaho state law, the moving party has 14 days to file their change of venue motion. So one of the, as soon as the defendant is arraigned, they're going to have 14 days to request a change of venue. One reason to continue the arraignment of the defendant is to consider whether or not that change of venue request is going to be put in, or it's going to be reserved with the court to bring it at a later point. Why would somebody keep it? Why would the defense keep it in that jurisdiction? I don't know that they should, and I don't know if it would be a smart move because it's a very small county. Everybody is impacted one way or the other. It's not a question of whether or not they've heard about it. The argument would be against moving it out of the jurisdiction so that there is less impact on people who are potential jurors and they've just heard about it at most.
Yeah, I think it's hard to come up with that argument. Obviously, the defense wants it moved. Prosecution may not, and they may make the vague argument that, hey, this is where it happened, this is the more appropriate place for it, and we can vet the jury members to find out whether or not they can fairly try Bryan Kohberger. But, I think that's sort of Pollyanna-ish to think that people can set aside whatever personal connections they might have to the investigation and now the apprehension of the suspect. It's tough. It's tough. So we'll see how that all plays out. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll talk more about this. Again, Bryan Kohberger is en route to Idaho. Stay where you are. Coming right back. so while we await the arrival of Mr. Kohberger in Idaho, again, Anjanette Levy there on the ground will keep us posted when he does arrive at the end of the extradition process. Let's set the Wayback Machine, Mr. Peabody, to March 2019. Remember Varsity Blues? And I'm not talking about the movie with, who was in that, Mr. Beekman? What was his name? Oh, James Vander Beek and John Voight. Not that Varsity Blues, 1990-something movie. It was horrible. This was horrible as well in a different way. Operation Varsity Blues. William Rick Singer, is it all starting to come back to you? This is a case against the gentleman who came up with this idea that if you pay him enough money, he'll get somebody to take college entrance exam tests for your kid or create some fictional, athletic skill that you may not have. And he got a lot of kids into a lot of schools. And you probably remember Felicity Huffman, Lori Loughlin doing some time. Yeah, that's what happened in that case. Well, today, he's going to be sentenced for his activities. He pled guilty, conspiracy to racketeering, conspiracy to money laundering. So those are the charges pending. There were 50 people arrested in this case. Many of them pled out, including the two actresses I mentioned. They did less than a month or two in prison. And, it was really kind of like the Richie Rich Kid version of looking over somebody's shoulder during a test. These folks were gaming the system to get their less than qualified kids into some of the better schools across the country. So what I want to talk about today with Alalay Cameron and Jeffrey Wolf is what this guy should get for this sentence. He did cooperate with authorities to help get some of the other parents to take a deal. He basically would call them up, say, hey, the IRS is looking into my business. I need you to confirm that you gave me some money for this and this, and these parents bought it, and they would, on recording devices, give him what he needed to let the FBI come after them. So, Alalay, what do you think? This guy, the guidelines are 6.5 years to 8 years. The prosecution obviously asking for more than the defense. They want the 6 years, and the defense says, just give him some probation. If you got to throw him in prison, 6 months. What do you think?
Well, the defense is saying that he's already serving a life sentence because he's lost his name, reputation, lifestyle, and he's agreed to forfeit all this money. There's the issue of whether or not his cooperation was truly a true cooperation. Usually, defendants, when they cooperate, they do not have burner phones. That is not hidden from the government. In this case, Mr. Singer was using a burner phone on the side without telling the government. Apparently he called 6 of the parents that were under scrutiny. He gave them the heads up. So I'm not so sure that the government would argue that his cooperation was full and wholehearted. However, Mr. Singer did provide quite a bit of information, and usually it's the little guys down the totem pole that provide information about the kingpin up the totem pole. In this case, it was different. It was the other way around.
Yeah, they kind of had him dead to rights, and they were asking him to help himself by turning in all these other folks. He's also going to have to cough up about $19 million that he got in the process of this. So, Jeff, what do you think? I don't think there's any way he's getting straight probation. Do you see him doing anything significant in terms of prison time?
So I always have a tough time with this, right? Because I'm a criminal defense attorney, and prison versus, rehabilitation is a struggle in my life on a daily basis. But what I always like to see on any case is that the punishment fits the crime. If the parents got months in jail, then this guy gets years in jail. That's how it should work, right? Because the parents looking to help their kids had to go somewhere where the criminal enterprise was set up for them to be able to get the kids into college. And this is the guy that did it. And you also look at some of the inequities in our own system, where you saw educators in Atlanta in a predominantly Black community gaming the system and changing the test scores of their schools to get more federal funding. They got 7 years. The government's only asking for 6 for this guy. Okay. So again, while I don't like seeing somebody get 6 years in prison, I certainly don't like seeing them get 6 years when somebody who did something to try and get funding for schools gets 7. That isn't fair either. Our system is so screwed up that if you give this guy probation, the guy that helps rich people, that's corrupt.
So here's my take on this. One of the coaches, I think a soccer coach who took about $3.5 million in kickbacks on this deal, got 3.5 years. I think it was 3.5 years. So I'm going to predict somewhere in the 4.5-year range. That's just my crapshoot guess there. But we'll see. That hearing, sentencing hearing, takes place at 2:30 this afternoon in Boston. Hey, guys, I'm going to have to thank and excuse you. Alala Cameron, Jeffrey Wolf, always good to have you guys and your opinions. Appreciate it. Stay where you are. We'll keep you posted on the Idaho transfer. I'm Michael Bryant. Hey, try to do the right thing. We'll see you next time right here on Law and Crime.